Hi everyone, welcome back to Cyber Talk with Nikolai show. And today we have a guest who is an expert in deception technologies. So this is a very interesting topic that I'd like to cover with him. And he's been in the space for quite some time. And actually, he's the one who pioneered deception technologies to begin with. So today we have Gadi Ivan. So he used to be CEO and founder of Symmetry, and then the company got sold later, but he's still very much engaged in all cybersecurity activities, and everyone is welcome to look at his profile on LinkedIn. He has very distinguished history of where he started with ADF, a Unit 8200, and his career progression and wonderful thing he has done. And I certainly appreciate his time that he was able to join us today and have conversation. So I'd like to turn over to Gadi right now, let him introduce himself and give us a little bit highlights of your career. And I know right now you're with CISO in residence with Team8. It's a wonderful organization that I enjoyed being part of a couple of weeks ago in New York, and I'm hoping to get with you together in Tel Aviv when time presents itself. But anyway, so if you can tell the audience what you're up to and how symmetry came about and your experience and essentially what actually drove you to develop symmetry and why did you decide that deception technology would be a lot better than just building honeypots all over the place. All right, Gadi,
And
on to you.
thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's always good when a friend invites me to talk. I don't do a lot of podcasts, but when a friend invites me, I always keep on. It's just so much fun. So as a background, I can go into a lot of details, but mostly I'm a security guy. I've been doing security for quite a lot of time, and it's kind of funny you say 8200 as in the IDF because when you meet Israelis, I think both CISOs and VCs immediately start counting with their fingers the second until they say I'm with 8200 originally. Yes, I was there early in my career. I don't necessarily see a reason to highlight that. Um, I've been a CISO with Israeli government. I've been in startups. I've been a consultant running PwC's Cybersecurity Center of Excellence in Israel. For 2 months in my life, I was even with Kaspersky as a VP before they became persona non grata. It was fun for 2 months,
Hmm.
and I'm very glad I was there before it all happened and only for 2 months, or I guess my career would be over now. So that was a bit of luck, even though they were very nice to me. I've had my own startup for 7 years, Symmetria, which we discussed and we'll discuss more. And that's one side of my career. The other side of my career is the community. I started a lot of the information sharing groups, threat hunting groups, information security operations groups, but before any of that was named that way. And I was always a community guy. That's what I did. I brought people together. ISOI, the Intersecurity Operations Intelligence Conference, which is a closed conference, I also helped start that. Now, ACOD, Art into Science, it has several names. The Conference on Defense, another operational and philosophical conference we started to try and push security forward. So I've always been a community guy. That's the other side of my career. And I'm very happy to tell you all about Symmetria and Deception. Although I will say now that I've been out of that game for 3, 4 years, so I'm careful with the things I'll say today.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure of some things that you started with. I don't think you're going to have easy time parting. So a lot of what Symmetry did and the market that started, it's still going strong as far as I can tell. So some companies and Symmetry, after being acquired, I think still is a viable player in the space, and a lot of organizations use. So could you tell a little bit more why did you decide that deception would be more valuable than building honeypots? Because before Symmetry and before deception, companies were trying at their earnest to build honeypots to try to catch bad guys before they do something, and that was quite a challenge. And I think that the conversation we had with you when in San Francisco at RSA, when I met you, I think at W, we were walking by, and then you start talking about symmetry, and first thing came to mind is like, well, it's a honeypot. And then you stop. It's like, no, 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 no. It's not a honeypot. It's the opposite. Let me explain to you. So why don't you just give us a little bit an idea on what led you to believe that deception will be the thing, and why is it better than honeypots?
Okay. So I still believe deception is all the shit, right? If we're allowed to use that language, I believe it's amazing. With that said, the market disagrees. The market does not like deception technology. People do not want to buy deception technology. We can talk about that as well. But when I got started, there are a lot of things that led me there. I had this entire pitch that was very philosophical. And a lot of people were talking back then about lateral movement as a big thing. And I pitched it from several perspectives. I have like 24 of them, but I'll limit myself. One was, first of all, I was just sick and tired of going to work every morning knowing I'm going to lose. And don't get me wrong, the controls we put in place matter. We increase the costs for the attackers. We do a lot of good, but when it comes down to it, we know when we go to work in the morning that if they want to get in and they want to invest the time and money, they'll do it. And that's so frustrating. And changing that has been one of the keys for me for why I'm doing this. And there are a few other aspects to this as well. For example, a little bit less today because a lot of the, for example, endpoint solutions now, a lot of their, let's call it business logic or mechanism or algorithm or engine is now at the back end over at the main office or whatever we call it. They're no longer just signature based running on the endpoint. So it's not as true, but essentially attackers can download the tool, run it in the lab, change a couple of bits in their malware or whatever it is they're using, and bypass you. Another aspect to the asymmetry of the situation is they have to succeed only once. When you have to succeed every single time, you have to stop every single attack. Their costs are much, much lower than yours. There are no real repercussions to what they do. Most of them will not go to jail. That is slowly changing, but not in any meaningful way. Although I'm always happy to see when the State Department does something interesting around that.
Yeah,
Or
I think CISOs are going to jail right now rather than
cases are
bad
going to
guys.
jail. Yes, true. But that's a different story. We can go into that if you want, but that's a different story. And one of the things I do now is I work for Team 8, which is we start companies. We're not a regular VC. And Team 8 used to be my biggest competitor with Elusive Networks, with Symmetria. So the fact that I ended up working here is fascinating to me. And I helped some of the portfolio companies out, and I managed the CISO community. We call the CISO Village, trying to push it forward until my next thing, probably 6 months from now, 2 years from now, who knows? And I'm really enjoying it. But that's a different topic entirely. So I also come from an incident response background, so I knew for a fact that if the attackers are caught, that's repercussions, even if they don't go to jail. If their tool is found out and every antivirus in the world now catches it and highlights it, that is a major setback. It can ruin operations dating years back, a decade back. It can stop their ability to launch operations for a year or two in the future. That's no longer necessarily as true. They have moved to using more open source, throwaway tools. There is a decline of shame. For example, most organizations in China don't really care if they get caught, right? They are spraying around. So it's interesting. But deception kind of reshuffled the whole deck. All of a sudden, when an attacker walks into a network, they are not sure of themselves. Because in the past, changing this to a different side of the pitch, what we did, and we still do to a large degree, is try to see the forensic evidence of what an attacker has already done in real time monitoring. So something that's left on the machine, some sort of activity that we can detect, an IP address, a hash function, whatever it is. Detection is complicated, it's far more than that, but still. But one thing that doesn't change is the attacker's methodology, their psychology. For example, when an attacker walks into a network, they collect intelligence. How do I get in? They're in. Is this machine interesting to me? Does it look real to me? Then lateral movement. Where should I go from here? Where does the user using this machine usually go so I don't create any noise? Again, if I care about it, depending on the type of attacker. So there is a cycle that repeats itself. The attacker methodology it always comes back to intelligence gathering and reconnaissance, or in other words, information. If you're familiar with the OODA loop, which was very, very big in threat intelligence cycles some years back and is still pretty well known, It comes originally from the Air Force. It's about observe, orient, decide, and act. We are often after the act, is where the detection works. So the more we can go left and arrive at the observation or orientation phases, the better. So the attacker collects the information, and that's where the so-called defender's advantage comes in. We control our network, we control our information, therefore we can control the attacker. So for example, an attacker, let's make it real, breaks into an endpoint machine. They're there, they're looking for intelligence. They see an RDP credential, a cookie, cache, NetUse cache, going to some network share, and they follow through on it because it looks real. It is real. All of a sudden, boom, they're caught. Meaning, I see they're there, and I have forensic information on the tool they're installing. That changes the ballgame. Now they have to be very careful. They have to double check everything. They have to move much, much slower, and they can get caught. And forensic information is already collected. And I can keep talking about deception forever, but two main ideas that developed from the days of the honeypot, where that we started talking about stories, we started talking about campaigns. Just like if you study military intelligence and deception, you see it's all about stories. So, for example, I don't just want to burden the network and hurt the network hygiene by spreading credentials everywhere, and we used to call them, uh, well, depending on how good they are, some people call them honey tokens. We like to call them breadcrumbs because we're leading the attackers on a path. We're creating a path for them. So maybe they're looking for a certain database. Maybe they're looking for whatever it is. We can just put the breadcrumb there and lead them. And on the other edge of that, there is the so-called honeypot. Although honeypots usually are low interaction, meaning a script that emulates a service. So it's very detectable. What are they broadcasting to the world? How do they answer when I interact with that service? It's low interaction, it's medium interaction. For me, just not good enough. So if you put a real machine, complete machine, on, say, a VM, that's another story, of course. And then you instrument that machine, that is a decoy, a high interaction honeypot. It's real. And that means the minute they connected to it, they logged in. Nobody ever should. They're caught. Naturally, the minute you start looking at implementing it, there are issues around integration, whether it is about connecting to the domain so it looks more real, making the machine itself look more real, using the golden image, a lot of different aspects you can discuss. And that's the basics of this more modern deception age. And from there, we can go in many directions. I'll give you just a few. One,
Yep.
and we caught 6 APT attackers in our time when Symmetria was still around. Iran, China, was fascinating. So a few other places we can go with this. Number one of the ideas we came up with was active SOC, where we would use deception to investigate. Say somebody has a window type alert, I forget the numbers by now, about somebody logging in, or privilege escalation, somebody logging in as admin. We don't know if that's real or not, an attack or not. It seems real enough.
Right.
We can immediately run to that machine, leave a credential in memory, that's a breadcrumb, and if that's used, we know it's an attacker. They use Mimikatz, whatever, to dump those credentials. We know it's an attacker. And you can automatically investigate things or leave breadcrumbs around the machine to where the attacker would go next. How fast can you do it within an organization? It's not as easy as it sounds, but it's cool. The idea is in the SIEM, you have a threshold, and below the threshold, you have events. Above the threshold, you have alerts. How can you get more coverage of all the events so you get more alerts as well, and you reduce the
Mm.
number of alerts that could be false positives? Another aspect to this is network type of honeypots. They're not useless. If, for example, you have several levels of infrastructure around the world, you're using the cloud, whatever, say you open just a regular honeypot, all of a sudden you get a lot of connections, bots, scans, almost useless. A lot of threat intelligence data is based on that. And if you collect it, it doesn't necessarily help you. But what if all of a sudden you discover that somebody you connected in the US East suddenly connected in the Singapore zone or AWS or whatever it is? And you say, wait, that's interesting. So you could, for example, profile them, look at the dictionary attack they're using for username password combination, say, oh, these 20, 30, 40, 60 their dictionary has been seen before. And whenever they scan me, they start in the US and end up in Singapore an hour later. Okay, let's let them in. Let's look at what malware they're using. Let's look at what IP addresses they're using. What commands are they running? You can all of a sudden start discovering really interesting information. And somewhere that the deception industry never went for is around actual intelligence, not detection, which is very different. So, for example, when an attacker scans your network, collects intelligence on your network, tries to figure out your organization, they might look at the system administrator on LinkedIn. They might look at your DNS infrastructure, whatever it is, to find their way in. And what I like to do is to do that to myself, see where the easiest ways in are.
Hmm.
Then, just like
Interesting.
SEO, search engine optimization, where I want the page on Google
Right.
to be the highest, I would change these so that what I put out there is the highest on their searches. And then I can cause their attacks to reach me in a place I want it to, which brings me to the next use of intelligence, kind of like detonation, where you check out malware and see how it works in a closed sandbox environment. How about we do incubation? We run their spear phishing attack, if we have it somehow, or their malware, in an organization that looks like ours. Now that's hard. It's really hard to do, and you can't keep them aware forever. And some people will come in and say, "Oh, what if they get pissed off and attack us later?" A lot of different arguments either way, but all of a sudden you're very proactive, and it's fascinating what you can do with deception. I'll say that as much as I believe in deception, and I'll end it there so we can have a discussion, the market does not want it. Don't get me wrong. There are some interesting things out there. For example, Thinkst. Rune has done amazing work over there. He sells, I don't want to speak for his products, but he sells honeypots, low interaction, medium interaction honeypots that just work. You don't have to spend a lot of time and people and trying to make the open source work. And he's been very successful with that because it just makes it easy. Again, it's not very advanced for APT level, nation state targeted attacks, whatever you want to call the buzzword, but it's very useful. Other deception companies have sold to different companies, and the products exist, although I don't think they're very advanced. But again, not for a lot of money, as far as I know. And then the largest exits in our field have been after deception companies pivoted toward identity. So I don't really think there is a vendor out. I don't know, but there is a vendor out there that actually provides deception technologies anymore and keeps working on them. But I could be wrong. Some of them were sold and are still a part of the wider um, offering of some vendors. So I'll say the market has not bought it. The market does not want deception. The market always says we want to do the basics first. And my counter to that is, how have the basics worked for you? There is always every data breach that happens, people go and say, "Oh, you know what? They should have done their basics." There is always another unpatched machine. There is always admin somewhere that's not been fixed as far as passwords go. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do our basics, but we should work in a world where we know our users are going to fuck up. We know there is always going to be an unpatched machine. We know there is going to be a problem, and demand that our security still works. We should demand from our vendors that 1 0 day is not going to bypass them. And once they do get in, I want them to be able to still operate. And I want their tools downloaded to not just stop working anymore because they've been studied. These are the demands I'm making of the world of vendors. And I'm not really getting that. And with deception, you could actually discover when an attacker is there. I've had occasions when I sold into organizations that the red team was my biggest advocate because they never get caught. And they want to get caught. Maybe somebody will cancel them out and they can work more with the do more purple teaming together with the blue team. So it was fascinating to me. But when it comes down to it, deception has been tried before, late 90s, early 2000s as an industry. Then it was tried again 2014 to 2020, and the market has just not budged. It's not really gotten anywhere. I'm disappointed with that, but I also accept it now. And I think I learned a lot by doing these 7 years of writing Symmetria.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because when I was working with Symmetry and looking at the market, I kind of saw the same thing that companies not that eager to jump on the bandwagon. It's like, oh yeah, that's the coolest thing since sliced bread. But at the same time, some CISOs and some organizations were adapting products like Symmetry or your competition. So from my point of view, like what you brought it up and what you just said, the market is not there. They go to basics, and I think it's primarily driven by frameworks that companies right now really focused on. And if you pick any framework, whether it's NIST CSF or ISO 27000 series, most of them don't say anything about deception. They talk about basic that you need to have all ADRs, you need to have SIEM, you need to have some threat intelligence, and then there's not much mentioning about, well, if you do this one, we're going to move the needle in certain direction. And I think just because right now there's a lot of pressure, or there's a lot of pressure in the space, especially in cybersecurity from regulators, that companies supposed to do certain things certain way, and they need to deliver certain solutions to make sure that company is being protected. Most CISOs are focusing it's like, okay, what do we need to do to address audit findings, or what do we need to do to make sure that next regulator comes and they satisfied with what we have in our environment. So that's kind of like my thinking, but I really do like it, and whatever you brought to the market, and the explanation you have given. So one question I would ask, like in for simplification, how effective it was. Like I know you sold your product to several companies, and it's actually also was participated in maybe games, I believe, war games at some point in time that they used your
Yeah,
product
we
to.
were part of the Cross Swords or Cross
Right.
Shields, one of NATO exercises from the center in Estonia. We're the only vendor I think ever invited. After a while, that they tried various vendors, and the vendors worked well against automated attacks, but the minute they faced actual humans, they failed miserably. And we were invited back, and we helped guide these people in how to attack. It was so fun. Look, when it comes down to it, I don't blame CISOs for not buying deception. I don't. Um, it's a different concept. It takes a while to educate the market. And when you have what you're looking for as must have, whether it's an EDR, for example, or whatever it is, you take care of that first. And usually we don't have our basics down. So looking at something else is difficult. Also, deception is a different idea. It requires you to think, it requires you to build something around your network. You think, wait, deception, am I risking something with the law here? Although you don't. Um, there's problems around proof of value. You go to work with somebody in a POC trying out your product, and all of a sudden they say, "Well, where are all the alerts?" I say, "I'll only alert if you're under attack." Like, what do you mean? The market is used to getting useless alerts all the time from our tools. But when I was a teenager, I learned video photography, and the teacher told me or somebody, "Don't blame the car for driving out of your frame. The market has voted; it does not want deception. I accept it. I've learned. My next startup will be different. I will look at things differently. I will never try to educate the market again." But yes, it worked. We have shown consistently how we have a low footprint. Integration is easy. We catch the Indians, the Iranians, the Chinese, and nobody cared. It was fascinating to me. And I understand that. The market is what needs to lead innovation. Innovation does not lead the market. Maybe it should, but I accept that it doesn't.
Well, it's kind of interesting because if you look at what happened with Silence and let's say CrowdStrike, so Silence introduced their innovative way of doing things in EDR space, and it seems like market went into the direction in a hurry. So semantics of the world were left behind temporarily. Now they're catching up, and because somebody was eating their lunch, so they're trying to stay ahead. But I would say Silence and technologies that they brought, they changed the market space, and they forced other EDR companies to compete, or if they want to stay alive, to essentially move in the same direction and try to use the same technology and improve greatly what we have right now on endpoints compared to what we used to have 15 years ago.
I would agree completely. I would say that the EDR is one of the most useful tools you can possibly have. I do believe that. I also believe that no matter how many years it's been out there, it's mediocre technology. It has issues around detection at the lower level. It does not cover the browser. There are a
Right.
lot of different issues that the EDR is truly mediocre. It still works really well um, to the degree where it has forced the threat actors to adapt. I believe, I can't prove it 100%, but I believe one of the reasons the threat actors have moved so much towards supply chain attacks, whether it's through source code or through third parties and so on and so forth, is because they're looking for new ways to attack. So again, EDR mediocre, very useful, force the attackers to change. So I think it's one of the best things that happened in the industry in many, many years. With that said, I've encountered situations where people said, wait, we have an EDR. It covers all of the MITRE ATT&CK framework details that deception would catch. Why would we need deception? Which is a more, I would say, quantified approach to choosing products, and I like it. But what it misses is deception is there for when the attacker has bypassed what you're
Right.
doing, regardless of what it is. Deception will catch the lateral movement. Deception will catch the attacker because of how they operate as opposed to what they do. And in different levels, not just on the endpoint. You could also enter the organization through IoT, and so on and so forth. So I don't necessarily accept that argument. What the best argument against deception I actually heard, as opposed to it's not important enough or it hasn't been proven to work and stuff like that, which I call bullshit on.
Thank you everyone for joining us for part one on deception technologies. Please stay tuned for the part two with more excitement with Gadi.
For more information, please go to our website at www.is2inc.com.